the lookouting was surprise and delight. It was hard enough when the label was active getting all of the bands to come together to do things. We were able to around like big anniversaries, but Alex, the kid who put that kind of mini festival together, was able to get bands that I never thought I'd see again back together, and it was great to to do that and get to be a fan of the music that was so important to me, rather than having to kind of like be involved in the business. I got to design the poster and help with conversations and contact information when there was a hole that needed to be filled in, but I didn't really have any kind of like any role, and so Brent's TV, the Smugglers, Nuisance, Monsula.
And you played yourself.
What's that? Yeah, the Potato Man. Yeah, sort of the original lineup of the Potato Man, which was Larry Livermore, Patrick Hines, and myself.
This is Christopher Appelgren. Among his many other accomplishments, he's the one that brought that previous Crazy Man Capigula to Lookout Records.
Kind of the version of the band that formed in the tiny Lookout office that was also Larry's studio apartment, did perform, and it was, we weren't the most musical of bands, so it was typically I would play hitting drumsticks on like a garbage can or box. This time I was actually seated behind the drum set.
A real drum kit.
Yeah. But it was amazing, and it's also been amazing that some of the bands have continued playing. Corrupted Morals, and what's also nice is that in the mid '90s, when Lookout sort of became a bigger company in the wake of Green Day's success, I think that there was a little bit of a disconnect with where the folks, where the Gilman Street sort of collectively felt like, Lookout isn't the Gilman label, and we're not the Lookout Records venue, and so it was nice to sort of celebrate Gilman's 30th anniversary and get to do that by kind of reconnecting the heritage of both places, because for me as a fan of these bands when I was a teenager and a fan of Gilman Street and spending every moment I could there, they were very connected in my life.
Do you think that besides this connection that you said, is it correct to say that we had maybe 3 big cornerstone institutions there in Lookout and Gilman and Maximum Rocknroll? Would you add something else to this?
I mean, it's hard because I think that when Lookout started, it was very much a regional label that was really dedicated to cataloging and commemorating all this great music that was happening at Gilman Street, and the kind of new attitude and new styles, and kind of a cool, irreverent scene. And obviously Gilman grew out of MRR. It was sort of started as a Maximum Rocknroll project. But I never thought of it as big pillars. I mean, Lookout went on to be something, we attempted to be sort of like a more credible national label, signing artists, punk and independent artists from all over. Gilman really has stayed true to what it was. Maximum Rocknroll, interestingly, in the 90s, sort of, kind of created their own border and said, like, we really focus on punk, and a lot of the stuff that is maybe more indie rock than punk, we don't want to cover anymore. And, so I think each thing, for a time, we were definitely, I don't know, like, I don't know if I give us as much credibility as that. I mean, we're not as long. Lookout wasn't as long lived, and you also had incredible independent labels in the Bay Area like Alternative Tentacles.
Sure.
You know, that has, you know, predates Lookout by many years, and you know, still continues to thrive and work with artists. So you know, I think it was definitely like a moment, part of a zeitgeist. And there was other things too. I mean, the Maximum Rocknroll volunteers and staff also helped start Epicenter and Blacklist Mail Order, which were, you know, in San Francisco and used to host shows and sell fanzines and punk records. And Blacklist, of course, was like a great mail order service, you know, kind of like the interpunk before the internet really exploded. So, you know, those to me were things that I thought as like really important, you know, kind of institutions, you know, more so than what we were doing.
Talk about the Corrupted Morals. How important were those bands in the very beginning? Operation Ivy and Crimpshrine and Corrupted Morals.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think I've heard various stories. I mean, I met Larry in early 1988, so right around the time that the first 4 EPs, 7 inches were released. And I was still
these 3 bands and the Lookouts, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, it was Crimpshrine, Operation Ivy, Isocracy, and Corrupted Morals. The Lookouts album had been released previously, and I don't think Larry really thought of that as of Lookout Records as a label per se.
Sure.
I think, as I understand it, his plan was just, you know, he wanted to put out, you know, his own band, and then I think he was a big fan of Isocracy, and Al Sabrantes tells it. He was going to do an he was going to do an Isocracy album, and then Larry saw Operation Ivy, and then the idea was to do a split album with both bands, and then David Hayes and he, who both were sort of percolating these ideas of doing labels, sort of brought them together. I think David Hayes was going to work with Crimpshrine and Corrupted Morals, and the idea of doing just the 4 7 inches was what was decided upon. I mean, I think all of them were really important. They all represented, they were all very different, they were all connected. You know, I think taken together, and because they were all released at one time, it felt like a big explosion of something, like, wow. And it's, you know, this sort of more hardcore sound of Corrupted Morals, and the, you know, punk ska of Operation Ivy, and the sort of like zany irreverence of Isocracy, and the earnest, you know, sort of you know, I don't know, buzzsaw melodies of Crimpshrine. I mean, all of it, like, were very distinct from each other, but taken together, you know, it was very powerful to me, especially as like a, you know, 14 to 15 year old. And I think, you know, it's sort of, rather than releasing one at a time, you were able to get this immediate kind of full-fledged sense of what this label was about, and to some large degree what was going on in Gilman Street in Berkeley, because it was definitely a statement of what was happening there too.
How about the compilations? I'm asking you because for us in Brazil they were very important. I mean, Can of Pork was really important for me because it was the first time we could listen to those bands and not buying the records just for reading in the catalog.
Yeah.
So the Thing That Ate Floyd and then Can of Pork, how important was to put out this compilation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they were really important. I mean, you know, Can of Pork was a project that Patrick Hines and I sort of worked on. It was one of the first records that I was responsible for when I was just working at the label. It was just the 3 of us, and it did feel important. It did feel like you were sort of trying to capture both what was happening, in the scene, a kind of snapshot of that moment in the scene. Definitely, those kind of big compilations were a great way to get into these bands. It's hard to remember that before the internet, you would read about bands and not be able to hear them. Unless like your friend had made a tape or something. So, and it was like this, kind of like a fun, and interesting way to sort of try to capture, like for lack of a better term, like capture a moment. And then, it's always fun to kind of create the booklet. Later on, compilations became more promotional. So, I can the value of like the double album 40 band compilation with like a big booklet inside got sort of lost. But I think it was almost like a fanzine itself, really. Thought about it.
Here we go again,
Okay, Chris, let's talk about Green Day.
Okay.
When did you realize they were gonna be big like they are? With this record, with Kerplunk, when did you say, oh, these guys are going to be huge?
It's hard to communicate exactly what watching and being a part of Green Day's growing success was like. I think that I was always very nervous until it was clear that they were the biggest band in the world. And let me try to explain that a little bit. Green Day were certainly one of the most successful bands on Lookout, but it was a time where everything we were doing was successful, or at least it exceeded our expectations. We would always sell through our pressings, and I don't think, being maybe 18 or 19 years old, I don't think that I could see that one of these bands was going to sort of burst out and have this mega success on a global scale. I always felt like the punk music that I loved and the music that Lookout was releasing was the best music in the world. But I thought that, because the rest of the world were stupid, they would never, they'd never get that. I thought like these bands were my Beatles and my Rolling Stones. But that doesn't mean that, there's no justice. So of course, the world will not love them. And also there had been a real heritage, or not a heritage. There had been historically bands that were signed to major labels, punk bands, independent underground bands. They would typically fail. Think of like bands like Husker Du or The Replacements that signed major labels, and that kind of ended their career. So my first thought when it became clear that Green Day were going to pursue a deal and sign a contract with Warner Brothers was concerned. I thought, these are guys like me, we're the same age, they're high school graduates, incredibly talented, have devoted themselves to their music, but what happens if they try this and it doesn't work out? Where will they be? Will the underground, the scene that sort of nurtured them may reject them. They can't, you can't come home again. I think that that's changed in the world, that you can successfully be a huge band and then continue to, and come home again. But I think also that the three of them had a confidence and an assuredness that I didn't have. As much as I loved them, saw them hundreds of times, believed that they were, tremendous, and I still thought that it was more likely that the world would shoot them up and spit them out. And I remember having a conversation with Billie Joe about that while they were on tour with Bad Religion and Sam I Am. I think Larry, I felt so passionate about it, and Larry put me on the phone with them, or with Billy from the road, and he was like, "Here, try to tell them what you think." And I tried to explain it and didn't do a very good job of it. But I remember him, just kind of telling me point blank, like, "Look, we believe that it's gonna work out," and he was right.
He was right. Yeah.
He came from far away, from New Orleans into the East Bay. He said, "Jesus is a Mecca." I said, "This ain't no Mecca, man. This place is fun."
When Rancid decided, originally, I guess Rancid, Tim and, I remember when the band formed, kind of, Tim and Matt had a band that was a little bit more metal tinged called Janeiro, and that sort of formed and broke up quickly, and we played a few shows.
No problem.
After that, I remember they quickly kind of we got back together as Rancid, and they were a great band. Almost immediately they'd have the crowd singing along with them at Gilman. And, kind of because of our history of working with Operation Ivy, we knew that we wanted to do something with them. And so the original plan was to do a series of 7-inch singles and then release an album that would be a kind of a compilation of those. So that's why the first record is called Single One, is because the idea that there would be these these additional singles. Of course, it's not a single at all because it's got 5 songs. But pretty soon after, I think playing shows, they got on Epitaph's radar, and it was I think that it made a lot of sense for them to make that move. We were thinking, okay, this is a continuation of the relationship that we built with these guys. I think Epitaph, we're really excited about Rancid and kind of and had resources that Lookout didn't have at that time, so while it was a shame to not do more with them, I remember them coming to the office, and I think we got coffee or something, and they sort of let us know they were gonna sign to Epitaph, and I'm trying to, I don't think there was certainly no ill will. It just was sort of like, in fact, we even planned to do kind of more one-off things, like the Rancid and Veil split, some things that sort of never came to fruition. But yeah, we always were, I think, big supporters of them, and I just, but as I said, it would have been great to do more. I think, for many years, Lookout Records and Alternative Tentacles had the same distribution company, so we were very much aligned, and with many of the kind of West Coast punk labels that were represented by Mordam, some smaller, some more garage, Estrus, I think, I knew Fat Mike, and I remember him coming to the Mordam Records warehouse to pitch Ruth Schwartz on the idea of distributing Fat, and I think she turned them down, or maybe said, like, come back after there's more records. I didn't.
He gave up on that one.
Yeah. I didn't actually meet Brett from Epitaph until kind of like till the mid '90s, and I definitely took a lot of inspiration from him, seeing like the beautiful Epitaph office. The kind of the operation that he had built was impressive, and when Lookout sort of became my responsibility, I definitely took a lot of like I said, inspiration and borrowed some vision for what I hoped to do with the label. We bought our own building in South Berkeley, created a warehouse space there. I love that he kind of created a home for his label, as well as really successfully making a space for kind of like a powerhouse operation to support his bands and releases. But yeah, I would say it was always positive. I think that there was friendly competition, but very rarely was there any kind of real conflict. I mean, there were a lot of bands. I don't think that we were looking to compete or steal bands or work with bands that would rather be somewhere else. And I don't think that they were either. It was sort of like you were building your team, but ultimately if either of those labels were successful, it sort of it meant that kind of success was available for us as well.
Two other bands I'd like you to talk about. First one is Pansy Division. How important was to have this band on your label, an openly gay band? How was that?
Pansy Division, I think it was incredibly important to work with them. I think that it wasn't clear when Larry and I went over and met with John Janole in his apartment for the first time to sort of talk about the possibility of doing a record, or even as Pat, Larry, and I sat in the office and listened to their demo tape and considered it. But we had, it was a really powerful way to represent the label's real openness and welcoming to all different styles, all different lifestyles, at a time when punk was a lot more homogenized and not even very, sort of women-friendly necessarily. This was something that I think it didn't feel that radical, but ultimately it became clear that it was radical, and it was the band were great and so much fun, and really sort of became part of the roster in a very big way, going on to a Green Day, touring with our other bands, it was I thought of it more of like, look, this is just another band that's sort of in this family of bands. But now looking back, it becomes more clear how significant it was because of the exposure that came through came from the tour with Green Day and some of the other things that they did that we got to be a part of. But I'll always think of us as being lucky to have gotten to work with them. And I remember that one sort of story was there were some early Lookout fans that came to Berkeley maybe in 93 or 94, definitely when we were still in Larry's tiny studio apartment, and they were just fans of some of the bands on the label and sought us out, and so Pat and I went to lunch with them, and they were sort of maybe from the Midwest, and I think we took them to a vegetarian Chinese restaurant, and they found that very weird, and one of the kids went and left and went to Burger King while we were at lunch because he couldn't couldn't abide by the food. And I remember we played them. The only video of any Lookout bands that we had was this early self-produced Pansy Division video that was very graphic. And we're like, oh, trying to think of ways to entertain them. We played the video, and I just remember sort of like the way that it obviously was, was kind of a startling experience for them, but it may be challenging to their own kind of, their own kind of, personal, norms or something. And to me, that was kind of exciting that we could sort of bring something that could be challenging and confrontational, but ultimately inclusive and friendly. I don't know. It felt like kind of in line with what the label was about.
The other band is Screeching Weasel. They had their ups and downs with Lookout, especially with Larry. You were very close to Ben Weasel, right? How is the relationship with the band?
Yes, I was close with Ben and really loved Screeching Weasel. I mean, they were one of the first bands that we worked with from outside of the Bay Area, and always a lot of work. I remember, times where they weren't happy with the mastering, where we had to go back and remaster, cut new test pressings because, the cymbals were too loud on Wiggle. But it was always, it was great working, but it felt like it was hard work. They asked a lot, but they were very committed and dedicated. And it was, it was always sort of, maybe it's because Ben is from the Midwest and Larry's also from the Midwest, and we have a much more easygoing attitude in California or something like that, but there was a lot of conflict, and discussion, and I felt like, unfortunately in the mid-90s that really came to a head, and it was at a time where I was really kind of a point person for Ben for many of the projects that he was doing through the label. And Lookout Records in our contracts always had this last point that said, both the artist and the label agree that the truest contract is one based upon friendship and trust, and we both agree to always strive to adhere to that, essentially to try to act in friendship and extend trust to each other. And when a conflict came up around how our royalties were calculated, it felt like that trust was really breaking down, and I was one of the few people at the label that really sort of had a relationship with Ben, and that I could talk to him about it, and it was sort of hard. I felt very responsible to him. I felt like here's an artist that had been part of building so much success for both his band, but also for Lookout Records in many ways, both with his own bands and with bringing other bands to the label. And here we had this disagreement that felt like it could be resolved. I flew out to Chicago, spent hours and hours on the phone with him, and ultimately it wasn't able to be resolved, and it became the catalyst for Larry and Patrick leaving Lookout and kind of like expediting their retirement. And I think I felt like I had to fix something in the label's relationship with Ben Weasel. Always, I think, for the rest of the time that the company existed until we, kind of cut ties with Ben completely, I was always still trying to fix this problem. And so I have a lot of regrets about that because I feel like I did a lot of work and put a lot of effort into trying to restore that relationship that seemed so valuable and important, and ultimately never was able to do that. And I take responsibility for that, but I also think some of the reason why has to do with just the type of person that Ben is and the way that he approaches his art and does the work of it. I think that's been proven out by maybe some of the relationships he's had with other labels, not being able to be continual. I think it's great that he's doing things himself now. That's probably makes the most sense. But I have regrets. I feel like it was that trying to right a wrong and being told that no, I owed him more. I had to do more. I had to buy his label, or look at had to buy his label and take Panic Button off his hands, and all these things that ultimately never amounted to much in his eyes because it was always the next thing. And it probably has a lot to do with my own, my own approach. But like I said, I love the band and I love the things that we were able to do together. And I just wish that that we had it, because it wasn't just me, but it was me kind of advocating for decisions of the label, that we hadn't tried so hard to make it work when we clearly probably should have just broken up in 1996. I met Larry when I was, a teenager, and we co-hosted a radio show together. I was a fan, and we forged a friendship that was really important to me. And I grew up with a single mother, so in many ways, Larry's support and encouragement, and some of the the experiences that I got doing the radio show together, going to shows, helping put on shows in our small little town that I lived in. It was so meaningful for me, and yet he wasn't my father. So I think that there were ups and downs, times that we would disagree about things and have to kind of duke it out. He also could be infuriating. Patrick and I used to do all the kind of illustration and layout for Lookout magazine, and Larry would just sort of be writing it and printing up pages for us to do the layouts, and we would do these marathon days where we'd arrive in the morning and then work until 10 o'clock at night, and I was like, I just have to leave, I need a break from this. But it was great. I mean, I really have a great deal of love and admiration for Larry. I think that there were certainly a lot of things that I would do differently. When I look back on the label, and I felt like for many years I tried to do something that would make Lookout feel like it reflected me in a way, and to try to sort of move beyond the shadow that Larry cast from the vision that he had at the outset. Ultimately, I feel like it'll always be his label, even though it was my job to run it and I owned it. And I think that if I had kind of kept that understanding in those years, I might have made a few. I don't think it would mean not releasing certain records, but I think I might have kind of sought him out more for kind of advice and consultation. But instead, I think because of the conflict that sort of prompted him to make his departure, and might feel like we had to do these things that 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 he didn't want to do while he was there, that I sort of started down this path of needing to do stuff dramatically different, and I kept on that. And in many ways, like, we could have, rather than Patrick and Larry and I leaving, we could have ended a label, and I could have started a label, at that time, and done all the things that Lookout did afterwards. I can't really go back in time, but yeah, I think I'm better for my friendship with Larry, and it certainly is complicated and not easy to simply characterize, but ultimately I'm better for having him in my life and being his.
How do you think the scene, since those early days, was involved with politics and social issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think my experience of punk, is highly political. The punk scene, when I became a teenager in the late 1980s, and was punk and radical politics were very intertwined. Maximum Rocknroll would have the feature one, kind of big article that would typically take a very strong radical viewpoint. I remember the first issue I bought, it was about prison conditions, and it was something I, as a 13-year-old, had never thought about. Like prison was for bad people, and yeah, it might be kind of horrible, and I never thought about prisoner rights, and so it was eye-opening, and I feel like certainly as it became more popular as a style of music, as a genre, it makes sense that the radical politics may not be at the forefront, and it certainly wasn't for every single punk band, but it was sort of like a place where more radical and interesting and odd and ideas could germinate. I felt like it's a very democratic, kind of do-it-yourself environment, and in many cases it's where new ideas, develop. So I think that it's hard to think about it. You're very right that the Bay Area and California is a very progressive place, so it's much easier to it's a much more welcoming place for more left-leaning and progressive and liberal concepts to exist without feeling the threat of those people that are in opposition to them. I think it's also really important that the bands that do have strong political beliefs, that are popular, that do have the, not only the eyes and minds of the punk community, but also broader audiences and people to share what they think. I mean, I wouldn't try to tell you what you should think or believe, but I believe in an inclusive society, one that's based on equality and diversity, and I think that to me that's why I gravitated to punk, was just a place for not only for music that's so great, but also for ideas that are more closely aligned with my own.
Yeah, and people here know that even before punk came in, there was an important history for free speech movement. And when I went to Berkeley, I went to the university to see the Mario Savior steps, and a lot of history right there. So I guess it must be something natural for this area, no?
Yeah, I mean, but it's interesting because you also, I think, some of like the radical right wing things that you've seen, the punk scene has a lot more history with that as well. I mean, you find that at Gilman Street, there's definitely history of fighting fascist skinheads, you know, and having to sort of like make sure that they understood that there wasn't a place for them in this scene or community. And those, I think, once you create a scene that allows for radical thinking, you're going to get, you know, a whole spectrum, and it's up to the community itself to sort of police what is acceptable within that.
Subject a little selfish because it has to do with me, but I'd like you to tell me about your international mail order. How was it? Did you sell records to many countries? I mean, probably there was a time where you were having a huge success and you had a lot of work, packaging and sending CDs. How was that time?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, my job, especially in those early years, and really a big part of all of our job was mail order. I mean, you know, we were not releasing so many records every month, and it was just 3 of us, and our mail order was huge, and it was, you know, with an independent record distributor at a time when punk and indie records were not really widely available in record stores, except ones that sort of catered to that kind of music. Mail order was tremendously important, and I made friendships with people that I sent records to, wrote them notes, you know, got their fanzines. So it was hugely like a big social thing, you know, social experience as well as a lot of work. You know, later on, we were able to was able to kind of forge relationships with different labels and different distribution companies in certain territories. You know, some of those were ones that our distributor Mordam had in place, partnerships with distributors in Europe or Japan. Some were ones that we, you know, had directly developed. I used to get to go to, you know, some conferences in Germany and France, like as a great opportunity to meet with some of our partners. Sometimes we would license records, you know, so they would be released domestically, but oftentimes that was a little bit more of a, you know, more challenging and hard to keep track of, and it felt, you know, like it was preferable to sell records. But, you know, I feel like regardless of you know, of where we tried to you know, to make our releases, you know, we wanted everyone that was interested in checking them out to be able to get them. We wanted prices to be inexpensive. You know, certainly international shipping is not cheap. So I you know, but we try to keep that down to the minimum cost possible, because we wanted to sort of like let everybody who felt interested or connected to the, you know, what we were doing to be able to you know, have a piece of it.
Yeah, that for us that was very important, because I mean in 92, 93 maybe, it was me and 3 friends of mine, my neighbors, and we used to gather money for 1 CD, and then we would buy the CD, and then when we had 4 CDs, we split it.
That's
CD.
So great.
And that's how I mean, first we used to write to the labels and ask for catalogs, and then we read the catalogs, and okay, let's try this one. I don't know if it's good or not.
Yeah.
I even brought the letters to show you here.
That's so cool. Right, and then letters from Rob.
Yeah, from Rob.
That's so
and
cool.
you here.
Oh yeah. Oh, did I write them? Oh yeah, there's Rob.
Oh, this was crazy. That Rob asked me for these Japanese superhero
that
TV
makes sense.
shows.
We were very big on you Trio and Rob. They did our mail order. Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, it was pink. Stamp a piece of paper.
Yeah.
What did this thing do though, I wonder? Oh, I think it's because we both wanted the Japanese superheroes. You know.
So this was really important to me. It was I mean, it was very difficult. We had no internet, of course.
Yeah, right.
And that's how we got music in Brazil back then. Do you remember people from Brazil buying from you?
I do. I remember. I remember reading letters. I really remember. And this is kind of akin to your question before. I recall getting a letter from Brazil that was like this guy telling us about this sort of like imminent battle between the punks and skinheads,
Yeah.
and how like they were sort of like, I don't think they wanted anything, but it was kind of like letting us know and seeking solidarity or something.
Sharing the story.
Yeah, like, and it hadn't happened yet, but it was going to happen.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking about that, like this sort of like, you know, at some, you know, in South America, there's like a war between the punks and skins. That's
true.
happening this summer.
Yeah, that was true. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being here. It was
Thank you.
Really great. It was awesome.
Won't be my baby now, won't be my girl, won't be the one who takes